Okay, so Ruth, you're gonna get us started?
Yep. Hello, my name is Ruth Nelson, and welcome to the Master Coaches Weekly Buzz. This week's updates will address current issues, trends, and conversations with leaders in our sport. We want to thank John Foreman for actually hosting this weekly buzz. John, to you.
Thanks, Ruth. Just to let new time viewers, I guess, in on what's happening here is I've been running a series of, I guess, 6 weeks now of conversations with coaches around the world on different topics. And the master coaches were involved in a couple of those sessions. And afterwards, Mick introduced the idea of let's look at maybe doing a weekly session where we talk about current events, 30 minutes real quick, and then encourage conversations afterwards. So this is now the second edition of that, and we look forward to keeping it going, at least for a couple months, I guess. So let's get things kicked off with John.
All right, now let's hear from former Olympic coach Mick Haley, who will introduce our special guest and our master coaches.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce to you John Speraw, our national men's team coach, UCLA head coach, and founder of First Point Volleyball Foundation. John's going to talk to us today about several things. One, the state of the union, so to speak, with our national team. It's hard to get information about that. And also state of the union with UCLA men's volleyball, and maybe what he sees with collegiate men's volleyball. So John, I'm just going to throw it to you and let you run with it.
Okay, well, thanks for having me, Mick, and inviting me, and John for allowing me to be here and chat a little bit. It's been a pleasure to know Mick all these years. You know, Mick and I were friendly even when I was coaching UCLA and he was over there with the Dirty Trojans. So we've always had a real good relationship, and it's a pleasure to be here. Well, with the national team, it is an interesting, well, gosh, isn't it interesting for everybody in every situation? And the national team is no different right now. It started really early for us in managing the national team athletes because all of them play overseas. And so we had a real early read on the circumstances around COVID because we had 6 players that were playing in Northern Italy. And obviously Northern Italy is where this really hit hard, maybe besides China for the first time. And so we had a lot of our players that were just trying to figure out how they were going to handle their situation and potentially get home. So it was first trying to manage all the phone calls, communicating. So we had a little bit of a heads up on the crisis that as it was unfolding at its epicenter. And the first thing we did is do everything we can to communicate with those athletes and inform them of COVID and talk to agents and with them to see about what their circumstances were and get them home. As of now, we have all of our athletes back home. We actually had one athlete that decided to remain in Italy for a long period of time, but he's now on his way home too. And so all of our athletes came home. They've been in quarantine. They're spread out all over the country. Obviously, we have a number of athletes that are home in Hawaii, and Matt Anderson is in Indianapolis. He just recently had his first child, so the timing for him to be in lockdown has probably worked out pretty well for him and spending time with his first. And so we're spread out all over. We don't know, as a lot of teams and a lot of environments, and I'll talk about UCLA too in a second, but we don't really know what the return to play process is going to be or how that's going to look. We had a Zoom call with the medical director for the USOPC just on Monday, and discussing the different phases as it would look for us to be able to come and even having a training camp this summer. And I think there's still a lot of unknowns as to whether or not we'll even be able to get together and train this summer, which is a remarkable set of circumstances considering we're now a year out from the Olympic Games. Obviously having the Olympic Games canceled was, I think, the right decision, not a surprising decision, but still, I think, pretty emotional for all of us. You train for 4, 8, 12 years, maybe your whole life looking for that moment, and to have that goalpost moved at the last second was something I think we all probably had to manage emotionally. Probably does benefit us a little bit more than maybe some other teams we'd had a couple really key players for us have some significant injuries over the last summer, Taylor Sander and Thomas Jeschke with shoulders. And so this does give us an opportunity to potentially have them go play overseas for a year and go through the rehabilitation process a little bit more thoroughly before the games. And on the other side, how are our veterans? Can they go? I get that question about can they continue and go a little bit longer? And I don't think we have any problems there. I think our older guys are in great condition. They each had, a lot of our older guys had wonderful seasons this past year before it was canceled. So I feel really positive about where we're at. For us, it's just about managing the uncertainty. We still don't know yet about VNL. VNL was originally rescheduled to be put on the back end of the summer after the Olympic Games, and they still have not made a final decision on that. That was supposed to come by the end of April, and here we are in early May without an answer. So like a lot of leaders in our positions right now, we can only communicate that we don't know what's happening. So hopefully we find out soon. I'd be surprised, honestly, if we had any competition this summer. And I think a lot of us are just trying to strategize how we might even be able to get together for even a couple weeks to have a training camp, to see one another, to continue building relationships and do all those things that you like to do as a team at some point here in Anaheim before they go back overseas at the end of the summer. I just don't know if that's going to happen. In the interim, we're just doing what every other team does, which is Zooms like this and trying to stay connected. And of course, try to figure out how to stay in shape and lift and move weight when some of them don't have any situation at home that's amenable to them being able to do what they normally do. So we do know whenever that day comes, when we can ramp up, it's going to be a significant ramp up time. A lot of our athletes have never in their life had a break like this. So what does that look like? And that'll be a lot of conversations with us and the training staff and the strength and conditioning staff, Aaron Brock and Tim Pillow, and trying to figure out, okay, what does that ramp up really look like? I've got a great relationship with Karch, so we collaborate on a lot of these conversations. And so we'll be talking together and with the leadership of USAD and trying to come up with a plan for whatever that training block might look like. As for UCLA, interesting situation with UCLA because we're on the quarter system. So so we're still in the middle of our final term. And so for us, it was first managing the emotional end of a season. And I was ahead of that because I've been dealing with the guys in Italy for a few weeks. So I've been giving COVID updates to my team, and I'd already told them 10 days before, gentlemen, don't be surprised if this season doesn't work out and has to end. And so at least for the Bruins, I know that my guys were pretty well prepared for that. I even told them that the season was going to be canceled the day it got canceled before it was officially canceled. Like I think I did benefit from the fact of having to manage the guys in Italy. And so we had spring break right around then. So they went home. We dispersed everybody as quickly as we could. I wanted to get everybody out of the dorms. I said, get out of those dorms as fast as you can. That's a cruise ship up there. Get out. And we did. We jumped on that. And I have a player from Denmark. We got him home really fast. A couple Canadians, we got them out of there. And now we put together a really tremendous communications plan. My assistant coaches, John Hawks and Spencer McLaughlin, have done a great job. We have a plan. I think there's this balance between trying to do too much and overwhelming them and maintaining communication. So every Monday morning at 9 a.m., we have coffee with coach. And it's usually around a life skill. Maybe an alumni comes back. Like we had Mike Ama'a come back and talk about what it was like to be a professional your first year overseas. What did he learn from that? We had another recent alum who's gotten into the investment world come in and talk about the markets and talk about internships and how to build a resume and what he did to get his career off to a fast start. We have a couple more guest speakers coming in to finish the quarter. And then we have small groups. We've split our team into 4 small groups of 6. And so we're having small group sessions with our clinical psychologists because I think we're all aware of managing the mental health of this situation with our athletes. So we do that 2 groups a week. So every 2 weeks, our entire team goes through a rotation with their small group and our clinical. And then we have culture conversations every 2 weeks around the book Legacy, which we're reading together as a group. And then the other week, we have an individual meeting with a coach and one athlete and an assessment tool that Hawks has built so we can track a conversation that's consistent over a period of time and find out where we have areas of need. So that's where we're at with UCLA, and then we just have to get them through another 4 weeks of their term, and then we'll see what the next step is with them. And honestly, we don't know. I don't think anybody really knows if we're going to have school. I know a lot of the presidents have come out and said that they're expecting classes to resume in the fall, and I don't think honestly any of them really knows. I think they're saying that to make sure they get some enrollment. I think if we don't have classes in the fall, I think things get really interesting from a financial perspective for all of us in the collegiate world. Obviously, we're in an interesting situation with the finances around the country, and it certainly applies to both the national team and UCLA. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty there and some valid concern. So those are the situations right now with USA and UCLA. Mick, I don't know if you have any other follow-up questions in regards to those two entities and where we're at.
Well, I have one. As a national team coach, John Foreman has had a number of international coaches on his platform here to talk about different things. But do you have relationships with foreign international coaches that are coaching national teams? And how do you guys have a relationship where you talk about this and you compare? And then how is the relationship with the administration at USAB with this? Are you able to transmit the needs of the team and the coaches to them and vice versa? And is that working out well for you?
I'll start with that one first. I'll start with the latter. I think I've been really impressed with Jamie Davis, CEO of USAV, and his transparency around the financial situation of USAV and the circumstances that we're in right now. He's been very direct, very open. He had an all-staff Zoom to discuss everything when this first kicked off. He had a Zoom just with the men's team and the women's team last week, talking about things that relate to the student athletes, athlete support. What's the situation with sponsorships? How does that relate to you? I think he's been tremendous. I think there has been some unique concerns of our athletes, particularly as we're the national team. Obviously, they're older, so they have mortgages and they have wives and kids and a lot of these things that we all do. So as we're looking at these athlete support issues, and it's real for them. And then, of course, how do you manage that as a group? Obviously, you have some young guys who are 22, 23, and they're living at home at mom, and they're fine. So you have a broad range of athletes that you have to manage in different ways with the national team, as you know, Mick, and that's always a unique challenge. But in terms of our level of communication with USAV, being able to communicate the needs of our athletes. We even had a Zoom with George Thompson, who's on the board of USAV now, who's in the finance world, to try and help and communicate guys understand how to apply for unemployment when you're an independent contractor. So there's been a lot of dialogue that's been going on. I feel like it's been good. I mean, I think there's always probably a need for more communication. But I think in this regard, I feel like we've been pretty thorough about it. We have the guys, I asked the guys how often they wanted to hear from me, because once they got home and they were with their families, and they need a little less probably than the UCLA guys. And so they said every 2 weeks is fine. And then if something comes up, and it's easy right now, if something comes up, I just call a Zoom and everybody can get on the next day. So I feel like that's been pretty good. In terms of my communication level with the international coaches, I feel like we have a good relationship with a lot of them. We don't communicate that much. The best relationship I have is obviously with Laurent Tilley, because I coached Kevin at UC Irvine. So the Tilleys are certainly great friends. And I love seeing Laurent and Kevin when we're on the road during the summers. But we have good relationships. Velasco came by UCLA a couple of years ago after, while he was coaching Argentina. And so, I mean, there's definitely coaches that we interact with more than others. But yeah, in general, very good relationships across the board. It's very collegial. So a really, really good group of coaches doing some pretty impressive things.
Great. I'm going to pass it along to Ruth Nelson. She's got a question, I think, relative to maybe the players for you.
John, just thinking about what you just said, you've got 22-year-olds that are loving it at home because the parents are taking care of them. And then you've got, what's the oldest player on the team?
Oh, that's a good question. I used to know that the last quad because we had David Lee and Reed Pretty in Rio.
Uh-huh.
I bet they were 36, 37. And I think when Loy in Beijing might have been 38. So sometimes you can get the later 30s now. I'm guessing that David Smith is probably 32, 33.
Okay,
maybe.
so you have 22 to 32, and you have some living at home and some have families.
Yeah.
Are they communicating amongst themselves? Do you know?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, Ruth, when it starts coming down to athlete support and finances, there's always a lot of talk. You know, all of a sudden people will chime in. So there is. I've often talked about this in some other speaking opportunities. I think one of the interesting things about coaching the national team is you do have this disparity. And I talk about it. You have guys coming out of college, and I've been pretty aggressive about bringing in young players and been fortunate there, right? And so you'll have guys that are just out of college and we train in Orange County. So they're probably living in Newport, having a very nice time socially. And then you have guys that are married with a kid and a mortgage. And certainly you have this team dynamic that can be pretty diverse. And how you manage that and make sure that everybody's earning the respect of their teammates is always a constant dialogue. Yes.
Well, I'll leave you at this. I know you're going to be glad to get back in the gym for sure.
For sure. I think we all are. I love both my teams. The interesting thing, another major difference between the UCLA guys were in the collegiate environment, you're turning over approximately 25% of your lineup every year. Yeah. And if you look at the national team and the youth movement we had in the beginning of the last quad, you know, we've been with a lot of these core group of guys now 6, 7, 8 years. And if you go back when I was the assistant with Alan, with Matty Anderson and Max Holt, there's guys that I've been coaching now for 10 years. And so there's some real deep relationships there. And I really always look forward to getting back. It's always like when they come back from being overseas for 8 months, it's always a little bit of a reunion every year. And we're certainly looking forward to that, hopefully sometime this summer.
All right. Well, I'm going to leave you with that. Brian, I know, is chopping at the bit because he's got some, how are you going to get back your college team? All right, Brian.
Hi, John. How are you?
Great, Brian.
I saw that this week that the NCAA came out with guidelines to be able to play sports in the fall. And there's a list of 9 steps and 3 phases to that. Have you seen this yet?
No, I'm less familiar with that. I'm more familiar with what came out with the USOPC because that obviously relates a little bit more urgently to what we're doing with the USCA. But not too far apart.
Good. One of the things that says here is that each state must have a 14-day downward trend in the COVID virus statistics to be able to participate at all. That's the first step. And as we reopen the country in different states, how do you think this is going to play out? Because obviously states are going to be different. So I just was shocked by the opening. That's the opening statement, let alone 3 phases and 19 steps. So
yes, I think it's going to be really challenging. And Brian, I know you're from Long Beach State, but no football team. But I think a lot of football schools around the country are wondering how's that going to work when you have interconference games. You know, the SEC in the South, they're opening up more aggressively right now. And if they have a non-conference game with a Pac-12 school, is that game going to occur? Is it going to become more regional? Are you just going to have conference games? How does that affect budgets? Some really big questions here. My guess is, from what I've read, they're planning for football seasons that start on time and have the full schedule and start a month late, and then maybe split between the fall and the spring, and have a scenario where we play football in the spring. So my guess is there's a lot of scenarios that leaders are looking at. I can tell you from you know what's interesting? I've been telling my team recently, Brian, maybe you'll find this interesting, is I see a lot of coaches and a lot of people being really like optimistic, rah, we're coming back in the fall. And you know what one of the great books that I loved was Good to Great. And I know it's a business book, but I always like getting outside the coaching wheelhouse every once in a while and reading some of those books. And in Good to Great, they talked about the Stockdale paradox. And I don't know if you remember the story about Admiral Stockdale. And he was shot down, I believe, in a POW camp in Vietnam for a long period of time. And he always said that the people that couldn't survive were the ones that always had some hope. which is kind of like odd, right? You think, okay, everybody needs to have hope. But he said the ones that said, we're going to be out of this POW camp by Christmas. And then Christmas would come and go. And then we're going to be out of this POW camp by Easter. And then Easter would come and go. They'd set these boundaries for themselves. And if it wasn't hit, they lost all their will to live, and they died. And so for me, I've been trying to be pretty conscious of that and try not to set some standard that may or may not occur. And I'm hopeful, of course, but I'm also preparing my team. And I tell them, I say, listen, like, we may not be back in the fall, and we need to be prepared for what that next step is and what you need and how we're going to continue this and how we can improve. I just want to be direct and real and not be, I don't know. I want to be hopeful, but not necessarily unrealistic. I think the situation we're in right now is so unique. Nobody knows. I can't tell you how many in the first 6 weeks, how many planning meetings we had that were a total waste of time. And so part of me is in like, hey, let's just wait and see. Let's take care of our guys today. And obviously put with the national team, see if we can put some things in place for some potentiality of training this summer. But I think it's a real conundrum, Brian. I don't know what's going to happen. It could become very regional. I think people will try to play sports, certainly as we all feel. We'd love to be watching some sport. We're sitting at home. What better time to watch some sports and there's nothing on TV?
It's a great book that talks precisely about what you're saying. There was a family that was sailing around the world, and their boat was capsized, and they lived in a dinghy, and they kept hoping to be discovered. And then they finally realized that the way they survive is learn how to live on the boat. Just learn how to live with what you have. And that's what made them successful, and they survived it because of that. Anyway, I want to turn over to Bob Bertucci. He has some questions for you.
Yeah, John, my questions are a little bit more specific to the collegiate game and men's volleyball specifically. With the NCAA presidents deciding to maintain, the 16 sport minimum for Division I, how do you feel? Does this get the men's volleyball off the chopping block? Because that was a big concern going into, the couple of weeks before. That if they dropped it down to 12 sports, then, some of our Olympic sports were potential, elimination sports. How do you feel about that at this point now that they've kept that minimum at 16?
Yeah, it was an interesting couple of weeks, Bob. I think, it started off with that proposal by the group of 5 to lower, or at least evaluate lowering the minimums required for Division I membership. And then a couple of days later, another 22 conference commissioners came out in support of that. And at that moment, I think we were probably in a little bit of trouble there for some programs. And when the Division I Council came back and said that they were not supportive of that, I think that was a huge win for our sport. I think in general, I feel like we're pretty lean and mean right now. I don't know that I was petrified that the sport would die. I think I was very concerned about losing some programs that didn't have the financial resources and how we could potentially shore them up. I got into and Mick knows this because of our work with the First Point Volleyball Foundation, but I got really into fundraising mode and seeing if we could really generate some revenue to shore up some of those programs that aren't at a Power 5. I wasn't worried about UCLA or SC or Stanford. I wasn't worried about those programs getting dropped, but I was worried about the general depth that we could potentially have. I feel better now. That was a big win to get through the board of directors last week. For them not to change the decision of the D1 Council, corroborated their opinions, and that was really, really good. Not just for volleyball and men's volleyball, but I think if it was going to drop down, I think you would have seen opportunities for student athletes, both male and female. And so I think, right now I feel good, but we're not out of the woods. I think, as we mentioned, enrollment in fall football, there's some big decisions that'll be coming down the pipe here financially. And I think we need to stay diligent. I think we need to stay in a mode of shoring up all programs, raising money, building relationships with alumni, making sure their voices are heard and their support is there for the programs. It's a very, very important time for us as a sport.
Well, John, I think, with that in mind, that you mentioned the financial aspects. I know Mick and yourself, Mick being one of the board of directors on that First Point Foundation. Mick, why don't we go ahead and, talk with John a little bit about First Point and where that might help men's volleyball right now.
Yeah, John, I know we're running out of time here, but basically I wanted to say this, and I'll let you kind of finish here a little bit, but I don't think people know the incredible amount of time you've put in all three of these situations. The national team, of course, the UCLA men's team, of course, but your efforts with First Point Volleyball Foundation have been exemplary. The way you and Wade Gerard have gotten people involved, people that you've convinced to be on the board, and what you've done for the college men's programs right now. Can you give us just a capsule, just a short capsule of what you're trying to do right now and what people listening might be able to do to jump on board and help out at this point?
Well, thank you, Mick. And I felt just a brief synopsis of where it all came from. I felt when I was signed up to do the national team for a second quad, I felt it was my responsibility to build for the future. And I've always felt that I wanted to give back to the sport that's given me so much. And when the opportunity arose to collaborate with Wade Gerard and build this foundation, I felt it was the right time. And what we've learned is that through intentional, focused effort, you can make a tremendous difference in growth. And over the last 3.5 years, we've raised over $3 million and started 17 new programs and now 60 additional scholarships for the sport. I think USAV, we've always expected USAV to be that advocate. And while they want to be, I think, as you know, they have a lot of balls in the air. They have Paralympic and regions and tournaments and marketing the sport and the national teams and trying to win medals and beach and indoor. I think for those of us that were interested in men's volleyball, we realized that we needed to have a very talented board that was focused on one area, and that's what we've done. So we've really built up, as you know, a phenomenal board of directors, some incredible minds in the room talking about how we grow the game. And now, fortunately, we have the infrastructure in place because we've been building it for 3.5 years, and we're in this moment of crisis. We can make an impact, and we have something there that we're not throwing this together in a panic. Like, we're ready to go. What we need is the support of people to come and help us and make donations. And we understand, and we were completely empathetic that this is a time that's very challenging for a lot of people financially. A lot of people are losing their jobs. If you're not in a position of stress, then we know that the First Point Volleyball Foundation can go and make a difference with programs. But we can absolutely do it. We're doing it. And so we're in a place right now where we can go and help the sport. We're doing it at a youth level. We've done a great job of growing high school and club, and then we're also growing it at every single level. And we just need to get through this moment, Nick. I know this is a biological problem. It's foundation, right? And we know that a year or two from now, we'll get through this. And boys volleyball and men's volleyball is growing. Women's volleyball is so strong right now. Together, collectively, as a volleyball family, we should get past this and continue to accelerate growth. And we're in a position to do that. I really firmly believe we just have to get through this moment. So anybody's help and support we'd be really grateful. We know we can deploy it to the right place in the right way. And just getting the word out about First Point like this, I really appreciate the platform to be able to talk about it. I still think there's a lot of people that don't know exactly what it is. So they can go to the firstpointvolleyball.org and learn a little bit more about the foundation and its genesis and the board and what we're doing for the game.
Well, John, thank you so much. I know this was a great imposition for us to ask you for this amount of time. I know how busy you are, and I can't tell you how much MasterCoaches and the John Foreman platform really appreciate you being on today. And I hope it really will fire some people up to get involved with First Point, as well as understand what's going on out there in men's volleyball. So thank you from all of us. Appreciate you being on. And for those of you watching, next week, we have a very unique show coming also. We, USAV has announced they have a professional women's team or pro league coming on. They haven't announced all of the arrangements yet, but besides that, we understand there's a second women's pro league being planned for later on after that. And David Soji, former head coach at the University of Hawaii women's program, is going to join us, and he's going to give us the information on a new pro league, an eight city planned league for women coming in the future also. So we have two pro leagues to look forward to for the women. And John, hopefully we'll look forward to getting a men's pro league going here sometime later after we stabilize everything. Okay.
Well, that'd be great. And Mick and all the coaches, thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Okay, summarizing here, John, thanks a lot. Bob, Mick, Brian, and I, thank you. Follow us on Facebook at Volleyball Master Coaches. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram, VB Master Coaches. And now back to you, John.
Thanks, Ruth. As I said, this is part of a conversation series that we're working on. So I've done, I think I'm getting close to 40 coaching conversations that I encourage you to check out. You can find them on this Facebook page where this recording is through, Coaching Volleyball. You can also check me out on Twitter at Coaching VB, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Have a good rest of the week, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, John. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.